Hello everybody and happy holidays and welcome to this week's episode of the Minecraft Disney World Q&A. It's the series in which you ask me questions and I give you answers. And hopefully most of the time they're right. This week we've got a couple of questions and then I've got a cool topic to talk about. You've been all asking me for a couple of weeks now. In fact, I can't really credit this question, which I'll answer last because so many people have been asking it. But I have finally seen Saving Mr. Banks and I'm going to tell you what I thought. And a little bit about the movie. Anyway, before we get to that, let's get to some user-submitted questions. These are all questions that were submitted through the comment system on YouTube. And if you have a question that's Disney-related, that would be the best way to ask it. We're here in the Animal Kingdom. I hear a big chunk of Africa here is done, so we're going to go check it out. And we're going to jump right in. So first off, we have Kevin Clanky, who asks, "Hey Rob, another question. Why did Disney only make an illusion to make it at night at the Mexico and Germany Pavilion?" So I guess the question you're asking is why is the indoor... So he's referring to Mexico and Germany have indoor areas that are made to look like they're outdoors. Mexico is made to look like a Mexican village at dusk, and Germany's made to look like a German town square area also at night. And so I guess the question is why at night and not during the day, or why not both? My best guess, that there's no official answer that I can think of, but the best guess would be it's the easiest way to sell the illusion. For instance, because it's night, it's a lot darker, and that makes it a lot easier to blend that in or to sell the concept of it being night. Whereas if it's during the day, no amount of trickery on the ceiling of a big room is going to make the ceiling of a big room look like the sky. Whereas at night, it's dark out. That's the absence of light. So it's a lot simpler to make it dark and make it feel like it's nighttime. So my guess would be that. I also think that in many cases, especially during the day, people are going into these buildings to get out of the heat and to get out of the sun. And so it's a much more enjoyable feeling to step out of that and then into this nice cool dusk versus, another, going from one bright noon to another. Interesting question. I love that. I love that Disney does that. It's one of my favorite tricks, even though it's pretty simple. It just shows that, that's the whole concept at the end of the day, is to create a new environment to immerse you in. Our next question comes from Young Mula, who asks, "Hey Rob, I don't know if this is a rumor, but I heard a year or two ago that Disney was going to make an Egyptian theme park. Is this true or just a rumor?" So I'm not sure what you've heard. There is no Egypt Disneyland planned, either in terms of a Disneyland in Egypt or an Egypt theme park in Disney. What you're probably thinking of is that there is a program called Adventures by Disney, and it allows people who take part in the program to do some sort of cool adventure-like vacations around the world. And they had begun offering adventures in Egypt, so you could tour the pyramids, that sort of thing. I think, and don't quote me on it, I think it was something that DVC club members could use their credits on, as opposed to just stays at Disney World and Disneyland. So it's a little different from Aluwani, where it's an actual resort they've built, but it's more like you use those credits to fund a trip somewhere else in the world and do something there. So that might be what you're thinking of. What do we got over here? Fast passes for a thing. I heard they're working on the queue for the Kilimanjaro Safari. Is this where is this? No, working on it right here? Okay, coming soon. It's a work in progress. J Studio asks, "Hey Rob, how come Disney World gets more rides and cooler things than Disneyland?" I'd say I don't fully agree with that sentiment, Jay. What I would say, think about it. Disneyland just got Cars Land, they got California Adventure. I think they both get a pretty good amount of stuff. I think you might see more quantitative attractions added just for the nature of they have so much extra space at Disney World. You have to understand, the Disney World property is twice the size of the island of Manhattan. That's a lot of space if you've ever been to Manhattan. So they've got a lot to work with, and they have a lot of free room to breathe. Whereas in Disneyland, and they don't have a lot of room. And if you think about it, that's essentially why Walt wanted to build out in Florida, is because he felt constricted by, Disneyland and how there was just not a lot of space to work with. So, yet you still see things like Cars Land popping up. So, I mean, Disney makes it happen. It's just a matter of they might not be able to make it happen as often as, that you can in Disney World. So that's probably why. The other thing is Disneyland is sort of being this resort in the middle of, California. It's a big state. There's a lot to do. You're pretty close to LA, so there's plenty of other things you can do there. Whereas in Disney World, the other things to do in Orlando are like Universal and other theme parks. There's not a lot going on down there in Central Florida outside of that tourism industry, whereas California has got, it's a pretty big state. And the point I'm getting at is, one of the things that helps Disney is when they have a way to keep you on property for a long time. And it's probably harder to do that in California than it is in Florida. Uh-oh, I'm stuck. Oh, there we go. Just by the nature of that, there's so much, if I go to California, and I mean, look, I'm thinking in the same manner. If I ever go out there, Disneyland would be part of a larger trip where I go see Hollywood, or I go to San Francisco, I go to all these other places. Yet when I go to Florida, I go to Disney World, and if I were to do anything else, it might be like Orlando, Universal Studios or something. So, I mean, but the bulk of that trip is going to be Disney World. So they're probably more incentivized to keep adding to Disney World to get people to go to Disney World, because it might make them more money at the end of the day. Although I'm sure both are making them plenty of money at the end of the day. Next question comes from Copycat705, who has 2 questions. First, what are your thoughts on Stitch's Great Escape? I know that it's hated by a lot of Disney fans, so I'd like to hear your opinion on the ride. Next, what is your favorite thrill ride on property? Thanks and have a great week. Well, thank you. So, yeah, Stitch's Great Escape has kind of a rough reputation, and I think partially it's because Extraterrestrial Alien Encounter was such an enjoyed ride, and that was unfortunately replaced by Stitch's Great Escape. My take on it, I don't really mind either way. Here's the thing: when I was young, I was way too scared to go on Extraterrestrial, so I had no history with the ride, and I had no attachment to it. So when it was gone and they replaced it with Stitch, I didn't really care. And that said, I have been on Stitch, and it's nothing amazing or to write home about. So I have a pretty, I'd say, neutral stance when it comes to Stitch's Great Escape. I don't love it. I don't hate it either. It's there. I mean, I think part of it plays in the fact that as fine as Lilo and Stitch is, that movie isn't one that I like put up there on the top of my list, so I'm not even really attached to the characters. I do kind of wish that there was more in terms of rides not based on other properties. Oh man, this guy got off the cart. You should hop in this one. Look, we got this person's on. Come on, hop on. I wonder if we were slowed down because we bumped into that car. It's entirely possible. So yeah, I don't mind. As for what's my favorite thrill ride on property, ooh. I mean, I love Rock and Roller Coaster with Aerosmith because I like it was the first roller coaster with inversions that I ever went on when I was younger. So I've got those memories associated with it. But I'd have to say Space Mountain or Tower of Terror. Tower of Terror mainly because I love the Twilight Zone. I used to watch it a lot as a kid. I still watch it a lot. So I love that. But Space Mountain's just got that sci-fi aesthetic that I'm such a fan of sci-fi. Let's see if we can break this cart that nobody's in, just to make sure we don't bump into it. Can we bump into it? Can we just break it? No, it's along for the ride. That's fine. Come on, maybe we could get it. All right. Oh, ooh. Maybe I can break it here. No? Okay. Next question comes from East Coast Railroad Videos. This is asking 2 questions. Number 1, we got picked to do the new band thing, referring to the wristband, that gets you 3 instant fast passes for anything. It opens your hotel door, etc., etc. What other improvements like this do you think we will see at Disney in the future to make guest time easier at the parks and resorts? And then the second question is, I know that Walt Disney World has connection with the airplanes to buses to make getting to the parks easier from Orlando International Airport. But why do you think Disney doesn't have anything for Amtrak? Lots of people use it, like people who can't fly for other reasons. Sorry for the long question. Thanks. Happy holidays. So second question I'm going to tackle first because I think that's the easier one. Projects like that aren't like creatively minded projects. They're business driven projects. When they offer this bus service from Orlando to Disney, it's because what it does is it removes the need to rent a car, and by removing the need to rent a car, you're pretty much, I hate to use the word stuck, but you're stuck in Disney property unless you were to get a cab, which can be costly. So Disney loves that because you're going to spend all your money at Disney. I love it because I don't have to deal with renting a car. I don't have to deal with getting my luggage. It makes life easier for me when I was already going to go there to stay at Disney anyway. That said, it's a numbers game. Why isn't it for trains? Because they probably had business analysts. Whoa, what happened? Oh no, I broke off from the group. They probably had business analysts look at the situation and go, yeah, a lot of people use trains to get to Disney, but not enough for it to be financially worth it for us. We could look and see X amount of people take trains to Disney and X amount of people who take those trains rent a car. And if we convert them into staying on property, oh man, I am really stuck here, aren't I? And I'm up here for good. It just, at the end of the day, I don't think it was worth the money for them because, again, it's a free service for us, but that means it costs a lot of money for Disney. Okay, now we're at the MK. Now, to answer your other question, what do we think we'll see in the future to make guest life easier? I mean, I always say that if I knew the answer to this, I would be a very rich man right now and I'd be working for Disney because I'm not really sure. Certainly, I think they're going in a great direction by using technology to benefit themselves as well as benefit the guests. The guests, it makes life easier because they can just easily get into rooms, easily get fast passes, easily buy things. It benefits Disney because they get all that data. They get to see, oh, look at this RFID. This guest went from the theme park right to Space Mountain and then bought a burger and then went over here. And that sounds like a breach of privacy, right? But if you think about why they're using it, they might say, okay, well, we looked at everybody who went to the park and we found most people go to get burgers after Space Mountain in the morning. So we need to shift and make sure our kitchens over by Space Mountain are more stocked than the ones over by Adventureland. Now, I'm making all of this stuff up, of course. But the idea is they're using this data to make their park operations more efficient and maybe make better business decisions that will help them out and help the guests out. So I definitely see them doing more of it in the future. In what form, I'm not really sure. I would love to see them take some of that data and give it back to us in a way that can help us. For instance, imagine if that band, had a screen on it. Now, that's a big jump. We're talking about like an interactive watch sort of. But let's just pretend for like a minute here that it's maybe 10 years into the future and that's an extremely cheap technology to put together. Well, wouldn't it be great if you could walk around the parks and go, hey, I want to go to Space Mountain. And then, you hit a few buttons like you can already do on an app and see, oh, hey, this ride is a long line. And rather than it being based on estimations or based on user reports, it's based on the RFID data that's saying, hey, we tracked 150 people walking on a Space Mountain in the last 30 minutes, so we know exactly how many people are on the line right now and we could give you this precise wait time. I definitely think you're going to see more of that. It just really boils down to what form factor and how they do it, and that'd be great. I mean, you already hear cool ideas. Like you mentioned the practical stuff, buying stuff, getting in the hotel rooms, things like that. But, one idea I've heard about is, maybe a little kid is waiting in line to see Cinderella and or an RFID reader on the line picks up her wristband and finds out her name is Sarah, right? And Cinderella is able to see through like maybe an iPad or some form of device, okay, the next girl who's coming up, her name is Sarah, and then Cinderella can greet that little girl by saying, hey Sarah, how are you enjoying Disney? Like, for an adult, that's like a cool thing, but like for a child, that's mind-blowing. That could be so mind-blowing to imagine having your favorite character just greet you by name and know it's you. That's such a great thing that could be done, and I think uses like that are going to be the most exciting to learn about. I think, you know, the business stuff sort of just, it'll be very practical stuff that makes sense, but it's the creative things like that that'll be really cool. I mean, imagine if we get rides that start implementing this data. You know, what if, you know, I'm trying to think of a great example. Let's imagine that you had a ride like Soarin', right? And, you know, on your RFID wristband, it knows where you're coming from, you know, where you live. Like, I'm a New Yorker, and what if like on that Soarin' type ride, it went, oh, this is a New Yorker riding this, let's get the New York flight video in there. Wouldn't that be cool to see your hometown? You know, like little things like that would be really cool. Just taking that data that is personal data and weaving it into these stories that are told through attractions can be really cool. Or what was another one that or Buzz Lightyear, Space Ranger Sim, Toy Story Midway Mania. Can you imagine if the scoreboard just didn't have the position you were in your score, but your actually name, and it said, hey, Rob has, let's say 70 points, because I'm not good at that ride. Rob has 70 points, and I don't have to put my name in. It just knows who I am and puts it up there. That's a cool thing that you could see done. And the tech's totally possible. It's just a matter of them getting it in there. So, okay. I've answered all the questions. If you have a question, feel free to leave it in the comments. I try to get to every question, even if I don't answer it here on the show. I try and answer it in the comments themselves. Let's move on to Saving Mr. Banks. I finally saw it. So many people have asked me what my thoughts are on the ride, so I figured I will go ahead and talk about it for the rest of this episode here and give you my thoughts. So first off, if you're unfamiliar, Saving Mr. Banks is a film by Disney about P.L. Travers and a couple of weeks she spent in California in the 60s in the process of selling the rights of Mary Poppins to Walt Disney and the Walt Disney Company. And if you've ever read about this situation, P.L. Travers was extremely difficult to work with, was not a fan of Walt Disney, but eventually she did sell the rights, which, I mean, spoiler alert, Mary Poppins was made, so she did sell the rights. And this is sort of the movie about that. And the movie sort of bounces between her time in California during this 2-week span, and then it flashbacks to her as a child and sort of the formative years that formed the experiences that would later, I think, motivate her to make Mary Poppins. And it was a great movie. I thought it was a fantastic film. I say this as a standalone, as a film in a vacuum. I think it was a great movie. It was well made, well acted, well written, everything about it. That said, it is extremely historically inaccurate. You know, the movie sort of portrays very much a Disney-fied version of that history, when the reality of the situation is P.L. Travers did not like Disney, which you do see in the movie, but she did not like the movie at the end of the day. She did not like Mary Poppins. She thought it was a bad movie. And I don't think this movie lies about that, but I think this movie is very selective about leaving out facts so that it allows you to draw other conclusions. I think Tom Hanks' Walt Disney was fantastic. It's really dark on this ride. I can't see anything, actually. He may not look like Walt perfectly, but I think he picked up his mannerisms really, really well. It made me really wish that there was a Walt Disney biopic. I think more impressed I was with B.J. Novak and Jason Schwartzman, who played the Sherman Brothers, who were the two musicians known for a lot of music on Disney movies and a lot of music in the Disney parks as well. I thought I was going to go into that ride. Do I have, I have blindness. Why do I have blindness? That seems weird. think that's a new thing that they've updated. I went into the movie thinking I'd walk out dying for a Walt Disney movie, but I walked out really hoping that they make a Sherman Brothers biopic, because that would be so great. And I hope if they ever do that, they cast BJ Novak and Jason Schwartzman, because they did a fantastic job. Emma Thompson, hands down, deserves an Oscar nomination for her role as P.L. Travers. She did a fantastic job. Again, I think the only one hang-up I had about it was that it was really a selective retelling of history. Now, I don't have a hang-up as much as some other people. Other people who just won't see the movie for that reason. I do believe that when you're doing a film, a fictional film based on true events, that you do deserve to have this sort of breathing room to change history. That's what it's for. That's why it's not a documentary, because you're telling a story and you're using real events to motivate that. But the points might be different and the themes might be different. The thing is, I don't think the movie whitewashes the history as much as other people do, and it's hard to talk about it without talking about the ending of the film, which might be it might be the last thing I talk about, so people who want to avoid spoilers can do so. But the movie was great. Just seeing Disneyland and seeing Tom Hanks as Walt walking around makes me really wish that there was a biopic for Walt, because I think it'd be so interesting to learn that history. There are tons of like tiny little tidbits in there that I think are really cool, and I think Disney fans would really appreciate. For instance, towards the end of the movie in 1964, there's a scene that takes place in Walt Disney's office. And it starts out with him, and these aren't really spoilers because they're minor little things that aren't really related to the story, but it starts off with him with this like side comment about asking his assistant to push back his meeting with GE, and you line up the timing and you go, oh, he's probably meeting with GE for the World's Fair. That's really cool. And then when you go into the office during the scene, if you pay attention in the background, you can see a big map of Florida, and you see this red box around the central Florida Orlando area. And obviously, I think any Disney fan would know what was going on in his head at that point. But it's just cool. They never draw attention to it. They never say, oh, this is my next big project. It's just a part of the art in the scene, and if you're a Disney fan, you'll catch it and love it, and if you're not, it's still a great scene. And that's the takeaway from it for me with the movie, is that I recommend it for people to watch, even people who are not Disney fans. I still think it's a really great film. It's got a lot of tough competition this year, a lot of great movies coming out, but I do think Emma Thompson, at the very least, deserves an Oscar nomination. Tom was great as Walt, although I don't think he put up any sort of performance that would be worthy of a nomination. But there you have it. And even Colin Farrell was great. He played P.L. Travers' father in the flashbacks, and it was really great as well. So it was just a really good movie overall. And it looks like the sort of movie I'll definitely buy on Blu-ray when it comes out, because I can imagine that the behind-the-scenes extras will have a lot to do about, like, becoming Walt or recreating Walt Disney to look like it did in the 60s as opposed to what it looks like today, because they did film at Disneyland, but obviously Disneyland 2012, when it was filmed, does not look like Disneyland 1964. So now, that said, I would like to talk about the ending. So if you haven't seen the movie, you don't want any spoilers. Again, it's based on reality, so there's only so much you could keep spoiler free. Then I suggest ending the show here. Have a great week. I hope you make the most of it. If you're cool with listening to spoilers, then listen on. So, at the end of the movie, the biggest controversy that I've seen online when it comes to discussing the film is the whitewashing of history through the fact that it depicts P.L. Travers as being moved to tears by Mary Poppins, the film. It shows, it's not the very last scene, but it's toward the end. You see her in there during the premiere, and she's crying. And I think a lot of people took that as she was crying because she loved the movie that she thought she would hate, and that of course goes against history. She hated the movie. She didn't like it at all. You know, if anything, history says that she was crying because she hated it. But I don't think that's what that scene was about, and I think a lot of people misread that scene. She was crying throughout the scene, but I do think that there were a lot of visual cues in that scene that she was not happy with the movie. She seemed a little disgusted during the animation parts. It seemed like she was just totally unimpressed by the film in general. And I think that mirrors what real life was, But she also cries, but I don't think the crying was her enjoying the movie. I think what it was, and the theme there towards the end of the movie, is that she needed to learn to forgive herself because for all these years, she held herself accountable for disappointing her dying father, who was Mr. Banks. And, that's sort of where the title comes from, Saving Mr. Banks. Mr. Banks, the character, represented P.L. Travers' father. And it was only until Disney realized that he was able to convince her to give him the rights. I don't know how truthful that is to reality, but in the film, that's sort of how the narrative goes. Is he realizes Mary Poppins not there to save the kids. She's there to save the father, and the father in the movie is supposed to be, P.L. Travers' father. And I think eventually what he tells her is, she needs to learn, P.L. Travers needs to learn to forgive herself for what happened as a child, and the reason she was so, attached to Mary Poppins was because it was an issue that was so close to her that she was not able to resolve or have any sort of closure with. And what I took from that scene was that she was crying because she was finally living the closure that, for so many years in her life she never had. And it wasn't because the movie was so great, but it was because it was as simple as the movie triggering that in her and being the catalyst to make her finally forgive herself, which is what was really making her cry hysterically. And I have total experience with that. Like, listen, I could tell you firsthand that there are parts of movies in the past that have moved me to tears, not because of the movie itself was so good or the movie itself moved me, but it was because it was maybe just one little detail that triggered a memory, or one little detail that triggered a thought that moved me, and that caused me to sort of get emotional. And so I can totally understand the idea that she could watch Mary Poppins and be totally moved to tears, but not because she loved the movie or thought it was good. I've watched movies that I'm like okay with, but because there's one scene or one little detail. I've read a book, that almost had me crying because there's one line in it that might remind me of a thing that happened in my life, and that's all it takes to, bring up that memory. And and that goes both in good ways and bad ways. And I think that's what's happened there. So I think while Disney definitely did leave out the details that are gritty and truthful about the movie, which is that she hated the movie at the end of it, I don't think they intentionally lied to make it seem like she enjoyed the movie more than she actually did. I think that's just a case of people maybe misreading the scene. And to be fair, I was always taught in film school that if that's how people read the scene, then that's how the scene was made to be read. Maybe that wasn't the director's intention, but then that means the director did a bad job at it. So maybe if everyone really believes that she was moved to tears because she loved the film, then the director didn't properly portray that idea of her forgiving herself and being moved to tears over that. But that's what I took from it, and that's why I wasn't so harsh against the film as some other people were. Anyway, that was just my quick review of Saving Mr. Banks. If you haven't seen it yet, I highly suggest it. I really enjoyed it a lot. I was just totally smitten the whole time. I had a smile on my face whenever Tom Hanks is on screen as Walt, especially when he tells stories. Like, there's a scene where they're walking through Disneyland, and it just cuts away really briefly to the window on Main Street that says Elias Disney, which is Walt's father. And, it later comes back at the end of the film where he talks about how he had his own poor experiences with his family that he used to push him to become the character he was. But just seeing that earlier on, it's like I knew who Elias Disney was. I knew exactly the context of why his name was being shown, and that made me, giddy. Or, he would tell the story of how when he was younger, his father used to make him go out in the snowstorms before school and deliver the paper, and then he would go to school, and then he would come home, and then he would go out and deliver the evening edition of the paper. And that's a true story. That's absolutely, if you've ever read Walt's biography, his father worked him and his brother Roy quite a bit, and it sort of gave him, I think, the work ethic that allowed him to create this sort of Disney empire that he created before he passed away. And what really sort of blew my mind in the film was he mentions, and this is again spoilers, but if you're here at this point you don't care, he talks about how there are experiences that he doesn't look back with fondly, but they drive him to be this fun, imaginative character who creates these wonderful things, because why should anybody hang on to the weight of this unfortunate memory when you can be the storyteller to create a happy ending for it? And it's crazy because I've always thought of Walt as, a smart businessman and a creative and a future forward thinker, but I never thought of him as an emotional person. And to have Tom Hanks do that monologue about him as a child and his father and Roy and working in those memories, it made me realize that Walt, like anybody else, is an emotional person with memories and emotions, and those, like they do for everyone, drive our decisions sometimes. So I would 100% recommend seeing the film. I thought it was fantastic. And that's going to probably do it for this week. I would love to thank you all for joining me. I hope if you're still on vacation for the holidays, I hope you're enjoying it. If you're not, I hope you're enjoying your week anyway. I hope in either case you make the most of it, because it does make it that much better. And finally, I hope to see you all here next week for the next episode of the Minecraft Disney World Q&A. Bye, everybody.